One company stands out as a beacon of innovation and excellence. Whether you're seeking expert media support, events planning, mentorship, or corporate media training, East Africa Media Group is your trusted partner every step of the way. From audiovisual production to TV and radio broadcast.
Right here from
We are your destination for top quality content and services. Our team of talented professionals, from journalists
free and moving well.
to technical specialists, are on the heartbeat of our success. Welcome to East Africa Media Group, where creativity meets expertise and passion drives results.
One of the memories that really sticks out when I was growing up is the release of Nelson Mandela, which happened in February 1990. You know, again, when I go back to my experience in Rwanda, one of my first experiences when I came is that I was visiting the trade and I saw a lady who came with a SIM card in an envelope. You know, I had been in the telecoms industry at the time for 18 years. I'd never seen anything like that. Maybe, you know, I had not seen anything like that.
Are there any sort of regrets, any things you're saying, okay, if I only had, you know, some extra time, I think I would do this better? When you look back and you reflect, are there things you feel I would have made better decisions? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Talk to me a bit about how you reacted or how you felt when you got that communication that, hey Mapula, you're being redeployed to South Sudan. Hello there, welcome to Engage, where we don't just ask questions, we seek solutions. As always, my name is Eugene Anangwe, and today we are going to show you a conversation that we had earlier on of someone whose story is one of resilience, leadership, and groundbreaking achievements in Africa's telecommunications industry. She has led in high-stakes boardrooms, driven digital transformation across multiple African markets, and played a key role in shaping the future of connectivity on the continent. With over 2 decades of experience, she has not only built brands, but also empowered millions through technology and innovation. She's been at the helm of one of Rwanda's biggest corporations, steering it through an era of unprecedented growth. And now she takes on an even bigger challenge in another market. In the program, we are going to show you a sit-down that we had with Mapula Bodibe, the immediate past CEO of MTN Rwanda and the incoming CEO of MTN South Sudan. Let's take a look at this and let's engage. Right, you are watching us and we are coming to you live from our studios right here at East Africa Media Group headquarters, and this is Engage. And of course our guest today is an amazing person who actually I would like us to get to know a bit more about, and of course we will be talking to her right here in the program in just a bit. If you're watching us for the first time, seeing me for the first time, hearing this voice for the first time, as always, my name is Eugene Anangwe. Thank you so much for making time. I'm here with Mapula Bodibe. Thank you so much for making time, Mapula. I know that there's a lot to talk about, and I first of all want to start by saying thank you so much for gracing our studios. Actually, you have to know that you're the very first guest that we are hosting right here in our state-of-the-art studios. And I want us to start off this conversation from way back. A lot of us know Mapula, the Chief Executive Officer of MTN Rwanda, immediate former CEO and incoming for South Sudan. But I want us to take the arm of the clock way back to your early life, your early childhood, and of course your upbringing. Just talk to us a bit about some of those key childhood memories that have stuck with you since you are blessed to be on this world?
Oh, thank you so much, Eugene. Such a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. Wow. I think when I reflect on my childhood, I think first of all, I would say I was very blessed to be raised by educators. I grew up in South Africa, in a small township in the East Rand, not far from Johannesburg, called Kwatema. And it was a settlement town, actually close to mines. But my parents and my grandparents had relocated there from the village. So this was up and coming township. And I think what really sticks in my mind is, being raised in a family of educators. Both of them were teachers, my grandparents. My mom was working at the time, so they were, primarily with me most of the time. And I think one thing that they always instilled with me is, how education is the best equalizer. And I grew up with many, cousins, and all of us had the same upbringing around education being the foundation that's going to differentiate us in the future, even though we didn't have, much. But that was the key for us to succeed.
And that's really interesting, especially hearing the fact that you grew up in a family of educators, and then you've moved on to become one of the people who are enabling education through digital transformation, which we'll talk about in just a few. But I want to stay back in those days still, and maybe talk to me a bit about those key lessons, life lessons that your parents really instilled in you, that you feel transformed your worldview today.
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the memories that really sticks out when I was growing up is the release of Nelson Mandela, which happened in February 1990. I think at the time he had been somebody who we just knew had been imprisoned, and then out of the blue, I was 10 at the time, and this man got released from prison. And it was one of the most unbelievable moments, because as he came out, we expected him to come out guns blazing, trying to start a revolution again. But all he talked about again was education, which actually reinforced what I had been taught in my household. So for me, that became something that I really hung on to around how I'm going to distinguish myself in the world. And I was very lucky in that I was also, very top performer in my school. And out of the blue, when he came out, we had a whole lot of, international investors who came into the country, because he promised this rainbow nation. He promised this progressive society. I think South Africa was the darling of the world at the time. And then they came into our environment. And then I was one of the, youngsters selected to, get an award of a scholarship. And then overnight, even though I didn't have, poor upbringing, but overnight I was really cast into this new world of privilege. I went to a high school where I got exposed to, children from all over South Africa, but really, from some of the biggest families in the country, the Sisulus, even the Mandelas. And this is, the sort of exposure that I got. And one thing that taught me is that even with, my background, not having had that same stature, with the education and the performance that I had displayed, I was able to really be in that same sort of level with them.
Awesome. Yeah. And talking about your good performance that now transitioned you into a high school that enabled you to be able to experience the exposure from different parts of the world through the students that you're studying with. It brings me to the question on upbringing in terms of the discipline level. And when you just said in a family of teachers raised by teachers, sort of upbringing, how does that look like for those who have not been raised in such a family?
It's extreme, right? It's extreme. But I think in one way, I'm actually thankful for it. I mean, one of the things that, you know, people used to think, because of my grandmother was actually the school principal of my primary school, you know, that, you know, is assumed to come with a lot of privilege. But I can tell you, for me, it came with even more pressure, because of I was sort of in that position where I was a child that was raised by the school principal. I had to, you know, get even more, you know, like discipline in terms of my behavior. I had to be a role model. I remember one day arriving late at school, and they had locked the gates. And I was one of the kids outside the gate, and yet my grandmother was the one locking the gate.
There were no favors going to follow that.
No, exactly. And there was no favors. You know, I was like treated like everyone else. And that taught me that, you know, it's very important to really be disciplined and stand out by, not just by, you know, association, but by your behavior. Right. Yeah. Right. Tell me about, how about you?
Oh, interesting. I personally went through a lot. And when I say this, a lot of people I'm sure were watching already smiling and saying, you know, we can remember how their upbringing was. I was raised by a very strict father, and strict because today we can see the fruits of that strictness. Schooled in different parts of the Kenyan communities. I think there was a time when I studied in upcountry at my grandfather's village. Only to move again to Nairobi, where again I joined some schools there, and the strictness of our father was he always wanted us to ensure that we are taking education seriously, because, like you just said, education is the equalizer. You have education from your parents; it's the best gift you can always have. So I grew up with a lot of leadership following me. Because even at high school, I was the school captain. And if you go back to primary level, every time we got into a new class, I would always be picked as the class prefect, just to be able to ensure that I'm able to lead the teams or the classes in that sense. But we knew that we cannot make any mistake of having any level of indiscipline, because my father is that father who can come. He actually did come one day in school, and he caned me in school at the staff room. So you can see the level of discipline in that sense. But that brings me to the question I wanted to ask you. When it comes to the choices of the subjects that you had to choose, because I know at some point in your growing up, in your education, you had to pick for you to be able to know, this is my career path, this is where I want to go, but anchored on some subjects, anchored on some level of education. How did that go for you? And for anyone watching you now, seeing you in your level as the Chief Executive Officer, are there any subjects that they need to be looking at at high school? If they are watching us and they are at high school level and they need to decide, are there any?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you were talking about your story. It reminded me of, you know, when I went to my high school, I was actually elected to be SRC representative for my class. And until then, I actually didn't even know that I had those qualities. I think it's through the people that interact with you. When you talked about you were always being nominated, it's people around you that see those attributes, those qualities. So it's just something that came to mind. I think when it comes to subjects, it's interesting because, you know, when I went to Puting High School, this was the name of my high school, I had come from a Bantu education school. In terms of how South Africa was segregated. And this was now a very sort of like a private school with kids from all over, mixed race, etc. But one of the things they did to try to make sure that we were diverse and integrated, they banned the use of our vernacular languages. So you would get fined. But, you know, so I went from being very sort of like I would say average in my communication, especially in English, to now only being able to speak in English. And their principle was they wanted to make sure that nobody was left behind because, you know, my neighbor in my dormitory was white, my next door neighbor was Indian, so they wanted us. So interestingly, one of my best subjects in school where I came out, you know, in my matric year with an A was English. And having started from that background, you know, I like really over-indexed. And I feel like, you know, for anyone that foundation of communication, especially these days. You can have the core competency in different subjects, but being able to articulate, being able to communicate is very important. So I really think it's important for people to be having the right foundation in terms of English, and not just, communication, but really comprehension, because I think you can do a lot. So that was one. I think the other one for me was really around, business. I was very interested in, like commerce. So I gravitated towards subjects that had numbers, economics, and even accounting. So those were the kind of subjects that I did, but only because I just liked the business world. I saw business as something intriguing, and I ended up going in that direction. But I think one thing that was odd in my selection of subjects is I loved history. Yeah, I really loved history, world history, really hearing around, about what had happened. So those were some of the key subjects that I had.
It's interesting because you say the aspect of what seemed as a punishment then ended up being a motivation for a lot of us. And I think we used to think this was only happening in our schools, where we used to be, if you're caught speaking mother tongue or Swahili other than English, there was what we called a monto or disc. Yes. It was a very smelly bone. Oh, yes. And it had a string around it that whoever speaks mother tongue gets to put it hang it on their neck. And if I get to hear someone else, I pass it on to them. And every Friday we had an assembly, and the head teacher would call the first person who was given the monto. And then they would call the person they passed it on to. And the person they passed it on to called until there was a huge group in the middle of assembly, and all of them were to lie down and get their strokes of cane. So that made sure that everybody was avoiding to speak in mother tongue. And I think looking back, yes, it made us know how to speak English, but it had a risk on its own in terms of us forgetting our native, cultural rooted, languages, which I think are still very important at our continental level. But I want to move on this conversation to now graduating into, university, higher education, because it plays a key role in also molding our careers, fixing us into what we become in future. Talk to me a bit about that phase of your life. You finish primary school, you get into a point where now you've been admitted into secondary school, or how you called it that time. Maybe you can take us through that phase of your life.
Yes, so from my, gravitating towards these commercial subjects, and I did very well in them, I decided to venture into like a BCom. So my first degree was a BCom, because I thought, this is what I want to do. But also there was a lot of influence from my family. I came from that old school family where you were either going to be a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, or a pilot. And they wanted like proper qualification. So I did that because I wanted to be an accountant. So I completed a degree majoring in accounting and economics. But very early on, I realized that, as much as I was good in these subjects, it wasn't necessarily exactly what I wanted to do. But with that, I actually also had some exposure to marketing at a very low level, but mainly the commercial subjects. And then my first opportunity for employment was actually in an accounting firm because of this background. And that happens to be where I actually realized that this was not necessarily my forte. So I spent about a year in that organization, good at the numbers, but not really thriving, not really enjoying it, until I ventured into other areas. Right. Yeah, how about you?
For me, I think education from a high school perspective, learning in the village, because I studied in the village. The school is called Butere Boys High School. And being there grounded me into, first of all, being closer to my father, who I really look up to so much because of the leadership skills from the support in his capacity. But then from an education perspective, there was a lot of co-curricular activity that I was really good at. And every time there was this call that you need to really start letting go of some of these co-curricular activities because your grades might be affected by that. But for me, I think looking back, I see the need of allowing our children to have a balanced sort of performance in all areas. And I'm very happy because I was very good at drama festivals. I was very good at Science Congress. We did some of these projects and we went to perform, and I went up to, I think, provincial level. But for the drama festivals and music festivals, we could always go up to the national level. And at school, in terms of the performance, I was average. I would get B minus, which was good enough. So I always wanted to be this wholesome person because I know of my friends who actually were A students, but today life has become so difficult for them after school because they were not able to know how to mingle with society, how to socialize, how to use their talents, their gifts. And for me, I discovered my gift through the leadership positions I had, because I would always be required to stand in front of everyone at the assembly and make announcements. And every time I would speak, there was always claps that followed because of the level of public speaking skills that I had then. And this is what transitioned me into knowing this is what I want to do. Because in our literature class, we would always read passages, those storybooks, and then the teacher would pick whoever is reading paragraph 1 to paragraph 2, paragraph 2 to paragraph 4. And for me, the paragraphs had been given, I would exceed, and the teacher would keep quiet to just allow me to read on. So I realized that this is what I wanted to do, and I know there was some level of discouragement in terms of those teachers who would tell you, but media doesn't pay, it is not a well-paying job, and all those kind of things. But I think for me, I knew what I wanted even when I was in high school. And I've pursued that till today. And this is what I tell even the children of today and the people we mentor, that you need to discover your talent and try to discover it, especially just those God-given gifts, and then work around turning them into a career. And you'll always enjoy doing what you do. And I think that's what I do today. And maybe I might ask you now in terms of leadership, because you grew into this leader that has transformed different societies through the work that you do, through the levels that you served in. Were there any specific life lessons that transformed you into the leader that you are today? Were there any specific people in your family, your mother, your dad, your grandparents, that towed you into the line of leadership, and how did that happen?
Yeah, no, I mean, certainly. I think the background I had, which I mentioned, was very strict, with a lot of discipline. I think that's the first sort of modeling I received around, how to behave as a leader, how to be responsible. And steering that into, my high school, where I mentioned that I was nominated as a, class representative for the SRC. And that's something that continued, that started to follow me. And then I think beyond that, even in university, when I was actually part of groups, one of the things I remember is that when you're in university, you're always working in groups for different assignments, projects. I think naturally that became an area that I was always also excelling at, being, taking, the leadership position, just, organically. I found it as something that I was able to do. And then I think through that, I realized that, I think leadership is all about influence. And if you are able to get people to follow you through influence, I think that's something that, basically demonstrates that trait. I think beyond that, I would say that my family has a lot of women, really strong women. I come from a family where my grandmother had 6 kids, 5 girls and 1 boy, my uncle, and my mother is one of those. And when I reflect on all of them, first of all, they all mothered me. in their own different rights, but very, very strong personalities. So, they always joke that I had no chance. When I became appointed CEO, they said you had no chance because you were surrounded by people who in their own right were excelling and leading. So the muscle, the leadership muscle became part of who I am, because that's what I see around me. But not only that, I think when I started working, particularly I would say a defining moment was when I started working for MTN, was, having people who started to see that attribute and start to nurture it, almost like, very indirectly, you start seeing people steering you towards leadership positions because they are seeing something in you. So I would say my leadership journey was not something that I necessarily went out and sought, but it's something that found me. And because of people around me who saw something that, I could demonstrate in terms of influencing others.
Yeah. That's interesting, because a lot of times we don't get to know ourselves, and we don't get to see it, and it takes mentors to see that strength in us that we are not seeing at an individual level, and molding that into who we end up becoming. And I think a lot of that is being done here at our mentorship program. But what I wanted to understand deeply is, now you've gotten a chance, you've grown to the level where you get appointed to lead within the ranks of a huge company like MTN. I know there was other institutions where you served. I know Unilever, but let's try to fast forward a bit and then get to that point where you're graduating from your position that you had before the call or the communication that you are now being deployed to Rwanda to become the CEO of MTN Rwanda. Talk to me a bit about that transition phase from that role you had before getting the MTN Rwanda CEO position, and what does it usually take for any person within any institution to be able to find themselves growing, climbing that ladder in that sense? What were the nuggets of wisdom you got, or what were the secrets to see you get that level of promotion in that sense?
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting journey that I've had. So I joined MTN in 2005. So this year marks 20 years. Never ever did I think I would spend 20 years in any organization. But when I reflect on my journey at MTN, it's actually not surprising, because I joined at a time where technology was just starting off. The iPhone was not even launched at the time. But I became very intrigued by technology during the BlackBerry BBM era. And when I joined MTN, I was actually a marketing manager. I was very interested, as much as I had a commercial background with accounting and economics. I just loved working with people. Marketing is a field that allows you to work with people. So I enjoyed that. But when I went into MTN, they actually wanted me to lead products, which is quite interesting. But mostly it was about harnessing my understanding of consumers to help them to design products. So, and basically that became the start of my journey. But not only that, is that I actually joined within a marketing environment, but I was so curious in terms of the, this vast and evolving technology that I ended up, really putting my hands in a lot of things, I became interested in product. I became interested in, on the technology side. As much as I was not an engineer, I actually spent a lot of time with engineers, really trying to understand if I'm looking to, develop a product for a consumer, how does it come about? And then, I really loved the story of how technology enables citizens, communities, and society. So I was very curious about technology. I was very curious about the network. How does it work? So I spent a lot of time. So in that journey of my sort of being part of the organization, I would say one of the biggest attributes that really helped me to get me to where I am now is the curiosity, like living outside of my core and being able to really love the need to connect the dots of how, technology comes together to enable people. I'd say the other thing is that in my curiosity in trying to, show interest in different things, there were a lot of people watching, people who I call my sponsors, people who I mentioned that, they saw something in me and, started to nominate me, recommend me for different things. So I very soon found myself, moving into different roles. When I joined MTN, I applied for one role. But over that period of my 20 years, I've worked in 6 different roles, most of which, in fact, I'd say 5 of which I didn't apply for, just because of showing the curiosity, showing the interest, and showing the aptitude. And I think in that journey, I fast forward to, 2015 when I moved to Uganda, another opportunity which was really about learning about a different culture, a different country. I'd never been to Uganda at the time, but for me, it was still the same. It's like we are about, Africa is our home. It's all about how do we grow Africa. Different geography, but same script. So I went into that opportunity, really learned a lot as well, and then went back to South Africa. So when Rwanda came, I must admit that I had never been to Rwanda before. So July 2022 was the first time I came to Rwanda. But I came with that mindset of, once again, different geography, but same opportunity, same impact. And I think the difference between South Africa and Rwanda was, for me, the opportunity to really make an impact. Because, South Africa was quite advanced already, high internet penetration, high mobile penetration. But I saw an opportunity to say, here's a market which is very progressive, very dynamic, and how do I become a part of this success story of Rwanda? How do I contribute to this vision that Rwanda has around really, digitizing Africa? So that basically became the opportunity for me to pivot from South Africa, my comfort zone, into an environment which was new, but really, an opportunity to really make an impact in a very purposeful way.
Right. I like that, because I think what I'm hearing is that, for you to be able to achieve, you need to be intentional. But then you also have to get off your comfort zone in that sense, and always go the extra mile. If there's any leader struggling with these 3 principles or achieving these 3 principles, what sort of tips would you give them if they're watching and they're like, I want to be like Mapula or even better, but I'm struggling with this kind of fast thinking impact, thinking, getting off the comfort zone, and the aspect of consistency. What does it take to get to those 3 principles?
Yeah, so, I think firstly, I feel very privileged to work in the technology space, because I think the technology space is so diverse that it allows you to do a lot of things. It allows you to do a lot of good. Of course, it also allows you to do a lot of bad when you see what's happening around, say, cybersecurity. But if I dimension it based on what I believe can really be somebody's mindset around how do you use technology for impact, it's really about, looking at your role in a manner that changes people, in a manner that changes society. Because I think we are no longer, looking at where the world is right now, we're no longer in the days of working, what I call a job, a 9 to 5. It's all about how do you come into an environment and really leave it better than you found it? How do you come into an environment and make an impact? How do you change society? Because you have tools such as technology that allows you, to change. And I think I'm also privileged because I work in a company that enables that, they provide the tools in the form of connectivity, but by finding opportunity in the different markets that we operate in, for me, I think as leaders, it's an opportunity to say, how do I leverage what I have as a tool to really make an impact that actually empower society? Because I think there's a higher order purpose these days when you're a leader to really lead with impact, lead with purpose. And I think that's, you see when you look around organizations that, pivot or position themselves with that in mind, they become more successful. Especially these days where young people are so discerning. You know, we've seen so many companies very successful who have, you know, really been, you know, like really downsized overnight because of having sort of like a very sort of like insular a way of doing their business instead of purposeful. You know, I think we've seen enough examples of that. So I think the society we live in, the culture globally that we are now living in, forces us to have that, you know, acting with responsibility, acting with purpose in the way that we work. So I almost think that if you're a leader today, it's by default. You don't have a choice. The world, you know, demands it of you. And I think in terms of, you know, going the extra mile, I think again it's about, you know, again when I go back to my experience in Rwanda, one of my first experiences when I came is that I was visiting the trade and I saw a lady who came with a SIM card in an envelope. You know, I had been in the telecoms industry at the time for 18 years. I'd never seen anything like that. Maybe, you know, I had not seen anything like that because I came from an environment where everyone has a mobile phone. So that for me became sort of like an aha moment to say, wow, you know, we live in a continent where there are still people that don't have a mobile phone. So it's literally switched my gear into, you know, fast forward to say, this is why we are here. This is why, you know, the purpose that we have. This is what we need to do to make sure that everyone, you know, is able to live in a modern connected world.
In the same energy you're seeing failure, please try to see success. Because it's there. I tell people the coin is two-sided. You have one side of the coin which is telling you will fail. But there's another coin that tells you, no, you can do it. Listen to that one.
This training is really helpful because it helps us to communicate effectively.
I had a lot of favorite parts in this training, but if I could only stick to one favorite part, that part was the part of answering difficult problems from different journalists. And if you're someone that wants to learn a lot, I could recommend you to seek for this training.
We have to dream big, right? But we cannot achieve what we dream of if we continue to sleep. We have to wake up from that dream and then walk the talk to achieve those dreams that we have.
If you want to connect with your audience or the person you're speaking to, try to make them feel you opened up to them. And if you told them your personal story, then it means you're really passionate about this thing that you do. And authority. You see what I did there? Seriousness and authority. This is a very important thing actually I'm saying now. You see what I did there? When you take a low pitch, the room settles. The room feels this is now serious. He or she is gonna say something important.
I was very excited to get the trainings that were carried out by Eugene Anangwe. So I think my biggest experience is basically to understand what you normally do, but without knowing what could be the other impact on the other side. But based on the training now, it will help me to stabilize what will be the right information that I should be sharing or not necessarily sharing, but or how can you do it strategically, or how can it be helpful for the other person that you are talking with.
where media shapes perceptions. One company stands out as a beacon of innovation and excellence. Whether you're seeking expert media support, events planning, mentorship, or corporate media training, East Africa Media Group is your trusted partner every step of the way. From audiovisual production to TV and radio broadcast.
Right here from
We are your destination for top quality content and services. Our team of talented professionals, from journalists
Free and moving well. So
to technical specialists, are on the heartbeat of our success. Welcome to East Africa Media Group, where creativity meets expertise and passion drives results.
If you take memory lane, if you just walk down memory lane as your tour of service in Rwanda comes to an end or has come to an end in that sense, and you look back at your list of the why you're here, what would you be able to report back in terms of your ticking the box checklist? How would you be able to speak to that if you look back?
Yeah, so when I look back, I would say the three most important things that I was tasked with when I came to Rwanda. I think the first one was, overall, it was about digitization, I would say, in terms of, if I look at the umbrella, objective. I think the first one was, at the time, we didn't have our own 4G network. And Rwanda, in our MTN group, was the last country to be able to launch its own 4G network. So if I had to, reflect on that as an achievement, I am very proud of that. And it's something that I'm not only proud of having launched the 4G network on behalf of MTN in Rwanda, I'm proud of having, 87%, coverage of 4G within 1 year. That has not been achieved previously in the group. So, of course, naturally, we were trying to catch up to where the other countries were. But, it was really unprecedented to be able to grow at that fast pace. That's number one. I think the second one is, and I go back to the example of the lady with the SIM card. For me, that also really signaled a very important need around access to smartphones, access to devices. And that's something that I'm also very proud of. When I came to Rwanda, we were sitting at 26% smartphone penetration. And today, I'm able to say that I'm leaving a country with, for MTN, sitting at 36% smartphone penetration. And that became one of the things that I really was very focused on in terms of how do I, use different projects or initiatives to drive smartphone access. And then I think the third one for me was really around internet access. Again, going back to these two things, the 4G network together with the smartphone, what they are aimed at is enabling people to access the internet, because the GSMA reports that when people have access to internet, it can actually contribute to the growth of the GDP of the country, because they are, they become global citizens. And that's something that I'm also proud of, because of the rollout of the 4G network, because of the acceleration of smartphones, more people were able to access the internet. And from that point of view, something I'm also very proud of, to say today, we are able to say in Rwanda we have 34% internet penetration because of some of these interventions.
Right. And are there any sort of regrets, any things you're saying, okay, if I only had, some extra time, I think I would do this better? When you look back, when you reflect, are there things you feel I would have made better decisions? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think definitely there are some reflections. I think one of the things that I definitely think probably should have paid more attention to is customer experience. It's something that, luckily enough, I caught it, before my departure from Rwanda. About a year ago, I actually changed the structure within the company to make customer experience a center, whereas before it was something that was sitting in the support structure of the organization. Now it's actually sitting as a standalone business unit. And what I realized is that as much as we were innovating around 4G, as well as, rolling out our network, as well as smartphones, customer experience was an area that basically needed a lot of attention. And, because of some of the issues that we face in the market. And today I'm happy to say that we managed to recover our net promoter score, and in the group we are number 2 when it comes to net promoter score, because with the change in my structure we were able to be very intentional. But it is something that I think, given more time, my ambition would have been to really, do even more in terms of making sure that, customer experience, becomes the number 1 agenda for MTN Rwanda.
Yeah. It's interesting you talk about that, because it's very few institutions that see it that way, especially for institutions that usually report their profits. And when you're talking about, we made X amount of profits, and yet your customers are feeling cheated. They're feeling, this is money out of my pocket to yours, but I'm not getting value for my money in that sense. What would be your recommendation then to whoever takes over in this area as far as customer experience is concerned with MTN Rwanda?
No, certainly. I think it's really to really be very much on the pulse in terms of what's happening on the ground. I think Rwanda, being a market that we have, is everything is viral. If something goes wrong, it's very quickly can spread, which actually can affect the rest of your customers. So really being on the pulse, especially with the average citizen, Turaje, not people who are not affected. Really paying attention to that, and not only paying attention to that, making sure that we listen to them in terms of how we formulate our solutions, our services, our strategies. So leading from customer first instead of from profit first, because I believe that where if those issues are addressed, then revenue and profits becomes an output.
Interesting. You may not be able to do that here in Rwanda now, because your tenure now has ended in Rwanda, but you have now an opportunity to do even much more in South Sudan, Africa's youngest country. Talk to me a bit about how you reacted or how you felt when you got that communication that, hey, Mapula, you're being redeployed to South Sudan.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because when you work within MTN, you have to be open enough to realize that we work in Africa, and at any point in time, you can be redeployed to any market. It can be Afghanistan, it can be any country. So that's the first awareness that you need to have when you work in these roles. So for me, my experience when I received the news, I think the first thing was, I would say, I was very reflective, right? I was reflective because I tried to understand why did they choose South Sudan. And then as I started to learn more around South Sudan, I actually got very excited about the opportunity. You mentioned that it's Africa's youngest, country, and in all respects, it actually is also one of the youngest when it comes to our industry. It's almost like a country that is so ripe for growth, because it has the lowest mobile penetration, sitting at 12%. It has the lowest internet penetration. It has, in terms of opportunity, it's really, really quite exciting, because it's coming off a low base, and it's an opportunity to really, really scale to where most of the other countries are. So I'm actually quite excited about the opportunity, because I see an opportunity to make an impact not just incremental, but really, systematic impact in terms of how that industry in that country can actually propel and contribute to the growth of the country, the growth of the GDP, and really help to set the country up for success to, similar levels to where some of the other countries are.
Yeah, and on your to-do list, top 3, what are they for South Sudan?
Yeah, so I think for me, definitely increasing penetration. I mentioned that today it's got one of the lowest mobile penetration. So mobile penetration is actually sitting at 32% out of the full population. Internet penetration is sitting at 12%. So, this is relative to countries like South Africa where it's 80%, 90%. So the first thing is making sure that I, increase access to our service. Because when I saw the penetration numbers, I realized that there's a huge segment of the population, in fact the majority, that still don't have connection. Like, wow, So that for me is the number one. I would like to work as hard as possible to make sure that people have access to our services. What does that mean? It means making sure that core connectivity is in place. That could be partnering with other organizations to increase infrastructure, because one of the reasons connectivity is so low is because of the lack of infrastructure. But, we've seen how, for example, in Rwanda, organizations such as the energy sector as well as the telco sector partnering together can actually help to propel the, the scaling of infrastructure. So I'm looking forward to that, really increasing access to connectivity and therefore increasing access to services. That's number one. I think number two, definitely, I think looking at some of the success we've seen in Rwanda in terms of driving acceleration of smartphones, my number two priority is to make sure that we really focus on increasing and doubling up on, access to smartphones. Because I think because of the countries coming off the low base, there's a lot of, room to catch up on in terms of, having people that are digitized. And I think what that will do is that even despite maybe the lack of physical infrastructure, it will enable people to have access to, the global ecosystem, in various ways. We've seen how our kids are exposed to, what's happening globally. And I think that can really help to also propel the country forward. So that's number two. I think number three for me is really about really helping to contribute to the growth of the country, because I'm very conscious of the role that the ICT sector in MTN, being the lead mobile operator in South Sudan, has in terms of its contribution to the growth of the country and the development of the country. And for me, I'm very keen to, spend time with the stakeholders in South Sudan, hear what their ambitions are for the country, hear what their challenges are, and then see how, with the industry that I'll be, part of, in the company that I'll be leading, contribute to, really steering the country forward. It's what we call, nation states agenda. Whatever that nation state agenda is in South Sudan, it's really about how can MTN plug into that and really help to be part of, solving the, national priorities.
Yeah. Again, what I'm hearing is intentionality. And I must ask this because I'm sure you've been asked by those who are close to you. When it comes to South Sudan, there are those, when they Google South Sudan, what comes to their mind is the security situation in the country. But on the flip side, there is what's also good about South Sudan that is not being talked about in the media, or most people don't understand. And it must be said that a lot of people also feel this is a huge vote of confidence in picking you, a woman, to actually go to South Sudan. Yet we're in the 21st century where this should actually be seen normal, that because anyone can actually go to these places. But I would like you to talk to me a bit about that aspect of what you've had and how that makes you feel, especially about the country in its own state. Mm-hmm. and probably just to share with us that aspect of, look, I can do it. It's not any other person. I can actually do this. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you're absolutely right. I think a lot of people, when I talked about going to South Sudan, their reaction was immediately concern. 95% of the people, it's like, are you going to be safe? Because of it's a country that's been involved in war over the past few years, and the situation is still relatively unstable. But at the same time, I think I work in a group where I believe that when they decide to go into these countries, they do their due diligence. MTN has operated in Afghanistan for more than 20 years, which has been in war for as long as we can remember, and it's thriving and still able to operate as a core solution provider to actually help the country, in terms of mitigating some of the effects of war. And then I think when I look at South Sudan, I look at it similarly. I look at it as a country which has a sort of like a status and a history and a legacy which is war-torn. But I believe that MTN can actually be an organization that actually helps to contribute to addressing some of those challenges, because a lot of the challenges that the country face are not just political but also macroeconomic because of the lack of development. And I think as the country starts to position itself for development and growth, I think for me I see it as an opportunity. I think the company of course provides for safety measures for employees that are there, so that for me assures me that I'll be safe. And I'm quite assured that they won't send me there unless they believe that I can take on the task. And being a woman, for me, it shouldn't be something that qualifies or disqualifies me for taking on the role, because I believe that, at the core competency level, whether I'm a woman or not, it's about serving the country. It's about, making an impact and really using, the expertise I've accumulated over the last 20 years to really, contribute to the growth of the country.
Right. Before I let you go, I'm going to ask you about your husband and children. And I ask you this on the backdrop of the amount of work you need to do, the amount of thinking process, strategies. Talk to me about where they plug in this whole life of Mapula, from when we started this conversation to South Sudan.
Yeah, it's interesting. I sometimes call my kids MTN babies because, they were born whilst I was at MTN. So they've literally lived all their lives during my tenure at MTN. So they've seen, my dedication to the company. They've seen my, contribution. They've actually grown understanding that, there's a higher order, reason that I'm still at the company. So I think what I'm blessed is that I have a partner, my husband, who I've been married for the last 17 years, who has been very supportive. All of these, movements to different countries, Uganda, Rwanda, South Sudan, I'd never be able to do them without his support. And, he's been a very big champion and supporter for my, career progression. Even going to South Sudan, he was one of the people who said, for what you are trying to build in terms of your legacy, it's not a bad move, considering that I will be safe. So very supportive husband. In fact, one of the things I sometimes joke about is I met my husband when I was at Deloitte. That 1 year I spent as an accounting firm, and today I'm able to say it's somebody who's a life partner. My husband is he's an accountant. He basically had the same background that I had, and that's actually he was somebody I met once I was at Deloitte. And I think in terms of his focus, he's a finance person. He's a CFO for an American company, Marsh Africa, and that's what he's been doing for the last 10-12 years. And I think one of the advantages of him working for an American company is that he's able to actually be mobile, and that's how it's we are able to work in the countries that we are able to work in. So that's been a blessing. And when you say that, I reflect back in terms of
thinking about the children, and maybe someone also would be interested to know how does this actually usually work, because you need to move around. How do you maneuver around that? And then there's what we call the work-life balance. How do you balance? What's the secret? Does that even exist in your vocabulary?
I would say probably not, but it's about how do you really integrate the two together. You know, it's no longer work-life balance. It's really work-life integration and really being able to balance. You know, sometimes you'll over-index on work, sometimes you'll have to over-index on family. It's really about the coexistence. And I think for me, over and above my husband, who's a big supporter of my career, I also have been privileged to have, you know, a support structure, you know, in terms of my family, but also in the form of, you know, somebody who I appreciate dearly for, you know, having been with me for the past 16 years, really being my children's, you know, caregiver. And I think I always appreciate her because I think, you know, I say to her, she allows me to do what I do because, you know, she's able to complement me at home where I might be, you know, over-indexing at work. But definitely, you know, when I need to be at school, when I need to participate in children's activities, I don't compromise.
Awesome. I like that you have to have things that you don't compromise on in that sense. In closing, Mapula, if you were to give advice to your younger self, if you take back and meet your younger self, what sort of advice would you give? And especially as we look at even young people today in terms of finding their path, finding their career, understanding their purpose, because a lot of us have that challenge of just knowing what is my purpose in this world? What am I here for? And from our conversations, I've had someone who knows, who's a visionary, who understands that 1 + 1 will be equal to an impact, and that impact is what I want to see. So what advice would you give your younger self and the young people watching us today?
It's interesting. I actually think of you when I think of what I would tell young people. And I'm going to ask you maybe to share on your side. But one of my life mottos that I adopted when I was 13 years old, when I realized, and it speaks to those leadership qualities, is be the change you want to see. By Mahatma Gandhi. And it's really about how do you use what you think should be correct, but also be the catalyst for it, you know. And that's something that I would really encourage, you know, people to have as a you know, as a value, because a lot of people who've been successful, similar to you, it's because you see opportunity, you see a gap, and when you see that opportunity, you then become the catalyst to make things work. And with that, I would like you to share with me, how do you make that, you know, because when I see that, when I think about that, I think about you, because you, when I see you, I see somebody who consistently in the career, even when I've heard about your journey, you're consistently looking to be the change that you are looking for.
Yeah, that means a lot coming from you. Thank you very much for seeing me that way. And indeed, we have to see ourselves first that way for us to make such impact. Otherwise, it will always be just what people perceive you to be, and it doesn't reflect into the impact that is desired out there. So for me, I think it's just looking back and seeing how much I've been able to achieve, not on my own, but with a lot of support, but also with a lot of circumstances making you to be able to show up and deliver in the way I deliver today. And it's also because of some of the things I lacked, some of the opportunities I lacked while growing up, or some of the things I went through. And one of them was knocking doors for opportunities in media, and the doors being shut right in my face because I was not a celebrity. Because that time, only those with celebrity status were actually getting media jobs. And I knew I had it in me. The fire was burning in my stomach. I knew I can do it, even though I'd not really gotten to that level, but I knew I could. and going for voice tests, for commercials, and having to go through so many doors where the person walking me into those doors was using biometrics, fingerprints to open those doors. It showed me how opportunities were closed off for young people. And every time I thought about that, I always said, the day God will bless me with a place like this that we have today, or an opportunity to be in a position of decision making, I would not want any young person to go through what I went through. Because all we need are just opportunities to show what we can do. And when I got that opportunity in Rwanda in 2008, when everybody didn't really see it in me, it made me who I am today. And so every time I reflect on those moments, those tough times, I always say I don't want anyone to ever go through this kind of situation. So I always feel like if opportunities don't come, if those doors don't avail themselves, create them. And I know it's easy to say that, but you can create them in different ways by just identifying what are your God-given talents and then starting to think about how can you use them to impact many other people. And then always remembering that every tough time that you go through, your survival rate or chances of surviving or getting out of that problem is always 100%. You'll always survive. So just have the grit, have the will to want to get yourself out of that tough situation. And so I look back at all those tough situations that I've gone through in the line of duty in my career, and I see that I really did cross those lines, and here we are today. And so even to you as you go to South Sudan, we want to wish you all the best and keep impacting, keep transforming lives, because at least you know your purpose in this world. And just continue on that particular path, and we'll always be there, and there'll always be people to cheer you on even when you don't see them. So thank you so much, Mapula, for making time and being with us on Engage. It was very interesting engaging you right here on the program.
Thank you so much. It's been really great to chat to you, and I'm equally inspired.
Thank you. There you have it. We've had a very interesting engagement right here with Mapula, and of course, we want to say thank you for being a part of the program. We'll always be here on our East Africa Media Group platforms, EAMGTV, across all digital platforms. Please follow and, of course, leave a comment. We'll see you again next time. What a remarkable conversation we've had today with Mapula, a leader whose journey from her early years to the boardroom is a testament to hard work, vision, and unwavering determination. Her story reminds us that leadership is about impact, responsibility, and lifting others along the way. As she steps into her role at the MTN South Sudan, one thing is certain: her commitment to excellence and innovation will continue to drive meaningful change. To everyone watching, let this be a reminder that success is built on preparation, perseverance, and purpose. Keep thriving, keep learning, and never stop pushing forward. Thank you for being part of Engage, where real conversations shape real solutions. Until next time, stay informed, stay inspired, and stay engaged. As always, my name is Eugene Anangwe. Goodbye for now.
In a world where media shapes perceptions, one company stands out as a beacon of innovation and excellence. Whether you're seeking expert media support, events planning, mentorship, or corporate media training, East Africa Media Group is your trusted partner every step of the way. From audiovisual production to TV and radio broadcast.
Right here from
We are your destination for top quality content and services. Our team of talented professionals, from journalists
Free and moving well. So
to technical specialists, are at the heartbeat of our success. Welcome to East Africa Media Group, where creativity meets expertise and passion drives results.
In the same energy you're seeing failure, please try to see success. Because it's there. I tell people the coin is two-sided. You have one side of the coin which is telling you will fail. But there's another coin that tells you, no, you can do it. Listen to that one.
This training is really helpful because it helps us to communicate effectively.
I had a lot of favorite parts in this training, but if I could only stick to one favorite part, that part was the part of answering difficult problems from different journalists. And if you're someone that wants to learn a lot, I could recommend you to seek for this training.
We have to dream big, right? But we cannot achieve what we dream of if we continue to sleep. We have to wake up from that dream and then walk the talk to achieve those dreams that we have. If you want to connect with your audience or the person you're speaking to, try to make them feel you opened up to them. And if you told them your personal story, then it means you're really passionate about this thing that you do. And authority. You see what I did there? Seriousness and authority. This is a very important thing actually I'm saying now. You see what I did there? When you take a low pitch, the room settles. The room feels this is now serious. He or she is going to say something important.
I was very excited to get the trainings that were carried out by Eugene Anangwe. So I think my biggest experience is basically to understand what you normally do, but without knowing what could be the other impact on the other side. But based on the training now, it will help me to stabilize what will be the right information that I should be sharing or not necessarily sharing, or how can you do it strategically, or how can it be helpful for the other person that you are talking with.